Morning and welcome. Today it's May the 26th day, and here we are. We're still in lockdown, and we still have perhaps a little bit of time on our hands more than usual. I say that, and some people are busier than ever during this time, including myself. But this is partly why we've started this course with the thought that there might be people out there who are um, indeed got a bit of time on your hands and want to use it constructively. Some of you, I think, are using this time regularly every day to join us and just to follow along with this wonderful little course called Step by Step to Knowing God and finding out important matters, delving into important subjects to do with the Bible. What is Christianity? Who is Jesus? The gospel, as we are calling it. I didn't make that word up. That's in the Bible. It means good news. What is this good news about Jesus? So that is indeed what we're looking at today. I think I'll just put this light on. Here we are. Yeah, I'll just put that on there. So that's what we're looking at. And this particular week, the question is, what is Jesus like? And we started yesterday by saying this, that if this claim that we are making, that the Bible is declaring, and that Jesus was presenting at every point, that he's not just a man, he is also truly, fully God in human form. That's a pretty stupendous claim. I mean, there have been people who've made that claim and they've ended up in insane asylums, along with the man in the next bed who says he's Napoleon and the person at the end of the ward who says he's a poached egg. So there have been, people who in their minds, they've lost touch with reality. I am Jesus Christ, I am God. But with the true Lord Jesus Christ and what he actually said and did, he didn't just say it, he proclaimed it and he demonstrated it. And there's a lot of evidence for us to dig into and examine and to say, does the claim, does what the Bible say actually fit with reality, with history, what actually happened? And it's vital that we do that. Now, even to start there implies that you've come quite a way in this journey and that you are open in your thinking to think along those lines. Many people are not. For example, take Muslims. It's quite interesting that when you dig into Muslim ideas, into the Quran, and an Islamic way of thinking, that Muslims, not necessarily from the beginning, but certainly at a certain point, were greatly influenced by Greek thinking, people like Aristotle. And, you don't need to know all about that, but one of the things about Greek thinking is that it downgrades matter, stuff, physical stuff. And it is highly spiritual in a kind of transcendental kind of way. It's what you might call a form of super spirituality. So stuff, matter, doesn't really matter. And the heavenly, the spiritual, is beyond matter. It is essentially inscrutable, mysterious. We can't know anything about that heavenly realm, apart from the little bit that Allah has said and given us in the Quran. Part of that thinking is totally resistant to the idea that the transcendent God, the Lord of glory, who's beyond us, and we can't even know him, really. We just have to submit to him. That's what Islam means. And there is this deep prejudice against any idea that God could become human, could take flesh. The Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. Now, that's partly rooted in the Quran, but also in Greek thinking, which influenced Islamic thinking over the centuries, to the extent that even today, if you try and have a conversation with a Muslim, they are appalled by this. They are scandalized by this. And they'll even say things, this has happened to me. Well, do you think, therefore, that God could become a dog or a snake or a rat? That's how appalling it is to a Muslim mind that God could become man. You see, what they've done is they've started with a very strong prejudice, a very strong presupposition, heavily influenced by Greek thinking. But you see, if you do that, you've locked yourself in to begin with. Rather, what we have to do is start with the evidence. If God did become a man, are you open to that thought? What would it look like? Let's look at the evidence from the Gospels and see if it matches up. If that was the case, you see, if you reject that to begin with, then, well, almost certainly you wouldn't be listening to this, because everything then that's Christian, or everything that's based on a particular view of the Gospels of the Bible, is suspicious and really sort of blasphemous to begin with. Rather, what we have to do is to be humble, is to be open, is to go back to the source material, to read it for ourselves, to examine the evidence for ourselves, and then say, well, we know what God is like. Does this Jesus look like that? And is there credible evidence that Jesus, his claim is right, that he is God? So what is God like? Well, we've seen this over the last few weeks. He is great. He is almighty. He is the creator. He is a God who speaks with power. That's how the creation came into being. He is holy, spotless, sinless, blameless. And he is full of the most incredible, divine love, the love that gives, the love that serves, the love that meets needs. So what we need to do, and I'm not saying that this can't happen with Muslims, by the way. I have done this. I've sat down with Muslim people, and we have read through the Gospels, and we have examined the evidence. And ultimately, anyway, only God can open someone's mind, but typically he does it through his word and by the Holy Spirit. So yesterday, for example, in Mark chapter 4, and this week, by the way, I think we're mostly looking at the Gospel of Mark, which is a great place to start reading and exposing yourself to the actual evidence. We saw yesterday there was this furious storm on the lake. The disciples were in the boat. They were terrified. They thought they were going to drown. Jesus got up and he said to the storm, "Quiet, be still." And immediately the storm was stilled. It stopped. And the title yesterday was "The Creator in Action." Jesus had this unique power over creation. Could it be because indeed he is the creator? Today, our title is Power in Action. And here it's not so much the disturbances which have come into the natural world, like storms and things like that. Today now, it is disease that leads to death. This is another very famous story in the Gospel of Mark. The person who is the focus here is a little girl. We don't even know her name. Jairus's daughter. Jairus was the synagogue leader who came to Jesus. Let me read the first bit of the story. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers, named Jairus, came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. That's the beginning of this incident. It's interesting. We are told the name of the father, Jairus. That's significant. That indicates that he was a well-known person. And indeed he was. He was the ruler of a synagogue. He was a religious person. Did he go to the priests and the rabbis and ask them to help? No. Because they might have been very learned in the Old Testament scriptures. They might even have been good men in many ways, but they didn't have power to heal, and they certainly didn't have power over death. That's pretty typical of religion. Religion won't save you. It's extremely limited. It'll do something for you. I've just been talking about Muslims. There are millions of Muslims in the world. They're highly devout. It must be very, very meaningful for them. It must do something for them. But it doesn't have this sort of power that belongs to God alone. That's the story as it begins. Let's move on to 35 to 43. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? So she was dying. She must have been sick in some way. And now she's dead. So that's the end of the story, isn't it? Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid. Just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. These wailers almost certainly were the hired band of people who would be drafted in. You'd pay them money. They would have their flutes and their instruments, and they would sing. And then they were professional wailers. They knew how to cry and scream and tear their clothes. And they made a good living out of this. And they could see that this little child was dead. But Jesus rebukes them and drives them away and says this most astonishing thing. The child's not dead, but asleep. So astonishing, they laugh at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, just those three mentioned, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum. This would have been the Aramaic language, which was the language that Jesus and these people spoke. Talitha cum, which means, so we're given an interpretation. Little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately, the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Jairus comes and he's desperate. He knows that only Jesus has the power to help, to heal to begin with. But now she's dead. Well, can Jesus help with that? He doesn't say anything at this stage. He's probably in total despair. What does Jesus tell Jairus to do? at this point, he says, don't be afraid, just believe. Do you remember yesterday with the storm on the lake? Jesus said something very similar, didn't he, to the disciples? Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Fear and faith, they're enemies. If we are consumed with fear, we will not believe. And don't be afraid is a command from Jesus, just as to believe is. And I think he must be saying, believe in me. Now, if that's true, and I think it makes sense to say that, a man saying, believe in me, I've got the answer to this situation, to death. What kind of a man would say that? And then he acts on all of this. He does the most decisive, remarkable thing imaginable. He gets rid of all those hypocritical, mercenary weepers and wailers who were just in it for the money, gets rid of all of them, and he goes into the room with this little girl. And who does he go in with as witnesses? Well, you've got the mother and the father, and you've got those three disciples who are mentioned: Peter, James, and John. I wonder why he took them in particular. The mother and father, they if they are beginning to believe, then no one more than them would long for this miracle to happen. But what about the disciples? Yeah, they've seen a few miracles. They were there, weren't they, with the storm, as we saw yesterday, being calmed. Is it because Jesus is wanting to have witnesses? This is written by Mark, and many people believe that Mark got most of this from Peter. There's a lot of evidence for that. So the disciples are there partly as witnesses, and Jairus and his wife, they too will be witnesses later on, not straight away. In fact, Jesus says that they shouldn't talk about this straight away, but later on, when the Gospels are being written and when Christianity is being proclaimed and it will spread, there were living witnesses on the earth. Jesus didn't do this in secret. It wasn't done in a corner. It wasn't done in a cave. It wasn't done underground. It's in a home, which is accessible, and certain people have to see this. And how did Jesus bring the girl back to life? It's so beautiful, this, isn't it? He took her by the hand. He spoke to her in her native language. He didn't shout, he didn't scream, he didn't pray for hours, he didn't do any hocus pocus. This is not magic. This is a mighty divine miracle. Little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and walked around. And he says, give her something to eat. It couldn't be more natural in a sense, though it is supernatural in the most profound sense. So this is the evidence. This is what happened. I mean, I believe this literally happened. And if you begin with that, not presuppositions, not assumptions, not Greek thinking, not Islamic ideas, not naturalistic thoughts about miracles and life after death, we have to put all that out of our minds and come back to what the Bible actually says. What does that say to us? Where's that pointing us? It's pointing us, of course, to the uniqueness of Jesus. It's telling us that people were drawn to him. We see that he commands faith in himself. He could speak a truth that was beyond the visible and the material. She's not dead. She's just sleeping. He saw how death could be transformed from something really appalling and tragic, the ultimate tragedy, now to something wonderful. He could bring something wonderful out of death. He has power over death with a touch, with a word. No one else has ever done this before or since. And we see his authority and we see his love in this situation. Absolute authority and heart-melting, wonderful love. Just like God. Because here is the man who is God. We're coming face to face with him now, my friends. Here's the proof. Here's the evidence. Line by line, bit by bit, story by story, step by step. To knowing God, we can know him because he's come amongst us and he's revealed himself in wonderful incidents like this one. We'll see another one tomorrow. We're just going to keep reading through the Gospel of Mark this week. I'd encourage you to do the same at home. If you haven't got a Bible, let me know, and I'd be delighted to get one to you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this experience today. It's been great to have you. See you again tomorrow. God bless.